Hi, Ackerman 6th graders. It's Miss Silbernagel. Today we're going to talk about Walk Two Moons, chapters 29 through 32. All right, so here were the chapters that you read: The Tide Rises, Breaking In, The Photograph, and Chicken and Blackberry Kisses. All right, chapter 29 starts with Mr. Berkway's class. In class, Mr. Berkway reads a poem called The Tide Rises, The Tide Falls by Longfellow. This is about a traveler's footprints being washed away by a rising tide next to the ocean in the sand. Sal thinks that this is a terrifying poem about the darkness coming and the sea pulling the traveler into the ocean. She believes that that traveler drowns. Ben says maybe the person in the poem didn't drown in the ocean, but died like normal people do. Sal gets really upset and she says, "It isn't normal to die. It isn't normal. It's terrible." That seems to be a trigger for her. The poem makes Phoebe decide to go to the police with all of her evidence that her mom has been kidnapped. Sal goes along because she thinks Phoebe is taking action, and that's a good thing. In typical Phoebe form, she tells the police officers there has been a murder, or maybe just like a kidnapping, but for sure a murder. Sal and Phoebe meet Sergeant Bickle, and they explain everything: the lunatic, the notes, Miss Cadaver's missing husband, and the rhododendron bush. Phoebe shows Sergeant Bickle the envelope with the unidentifiable hair strands. The sergeant and his secretary try not to laugh, of course, because that's a silly thing to give them. Phoebe's father shows up to pick them up at the police station, and he looks really embarrassed. They end up going to Miss Cadaver's house to ask if there were any more details about the phone call from Mrs. Winterbottom. Mr. Winterbottom tells Phoebe her imagination is running away with her. And then we see in the car ride, Mr. Winterbottom starts to cry. Chapter 30 was Breaking In. A lot of birds of sadness wing-dinging their way around Phoebe's family. That's a quote from Gramps. This is a reference to one of those messages that was left on Phoebe's doorstep. Remember, these notes can become a topic and what we use later for our theme, meaning, what do we learn later in the book because of these notes? So keep those birds of sadness in your mind when it comes to topic and theme. Sal says Phoebe feels like another version of her. We know that there are similarities because Sal notices how Phoebe took advantage of her family, and Sal thinks she did the same thing before her mom left. Phoebe calls Sal to come over to her house late at night. Phoebe ends up going to Mrs. Cadaver's house and breaking in. Okay, so she didn't smash a window. The door was unlocked, and they kind of just walk in without really intending to actually go in. But they walk in anyway, so they are breaking in. Mrs. Partridge is in the house, and she's reading a Braille book. She is completely blind, but knows it's Sal because of the sound of her feet. Of course, the book she is reading is a murder mystery, which makes Phoebe wildly uncomfortable. Miss Cadaver's house is all sorts of interesting. She's got all sorts of crazy things around, like bearskin rugs, chairs with wild beasts on them, African masks, a stuffed squirrel, a cow with a spear in its side. Okay, maybe not a stuffed squirrel like that. Miss Partridge says she met Phoebe's brother. Wait a second. Phoebe doesn't have a brother. That's weird. Did she mean Prudence? On their way out of the house, Sal tries to tell Phoebe maybe a mother would just leave without explanation. Phoebe swears her mom would never do that, and the police need to be called again. Sal telling Phoebe her mom might not come back could be something that's not accurate. Phoebe's mom might come back. However, this tells us more about Sal than it does about Phoebe. Does Sal really know what happened to her own mom? Is it something really difficult to say out loud, and that's why Sal knows she isn't coming back? If Sal is trying to prep Phoebe for your mom might not come back, maybe Sal is saying that because she notices my mom isn't going to come back. Phoebe remembers painting her room violet with her mom. As she was looking around the house, finding things that reminded her of her mom, Sal thought the same thing had to be true for her and her dad. My mother did haunt our house in Bybanks, she says, and the fields and the barn. She was everywhere. You couldn't look at a single thing without being reminded of her. So Phoebe is looking around, remembering her mom. Sal says, I looked around, and everywhere I looked, I remembered my mom. Interesting. And it's interesting, too, that they're using the word haunt. Sal knows that what it feels like to remember everything about your mom while you're looking through your house. She thinks about the things she kept from her mom, a shawl or a scarf, a blue sweater, a yellow flowered dress. Sal tries to visualize her mom calling, but the phone never rings. She tries to see her mother walking up the driveway and returning to Bybanks. This also never happens. Sal wants to ask Ben what happened to his mother, but it's too late at night. Instead, she lays in bed thinking about the poem from class. How could it be normal, that traveler dying? How could such a thing be both normal and terrible, both at the same time? Sal thinks about how sad it is seeing Mr. Winterbottom cry over his wife being gone because it was the first time it actually showed he cared about her. Sal decides to help Phoebe get her home because of this. All right, chapter 31, the photograph. New note, more mystery. This note says, we never know the worth of water until the well is dry. Kind of like you don't know what you have until it's gone. Phoebe thinks her mother is in a well. Of course, she takes it seriously when that's not what it means. Sal tries to kiss Ben at school, but kisses his locker instead. Journals are being shared with the class. Oh no. Yikes. This is so much stuff all at once. Mr. Berkway reads the following journal entry. I think Betty, he changed the name, you could tell, because there was no one named Betty in our school. I think Betty will go to hell because she always takes the Lord's name in vain. She says God every 5 seconds. Okay, they're spilling that tea in class. They're definitely talking trash about each other. And Mr. Berkway is reading all of this stuff. So Mary Lou knows it's about her because she's the only one in class who does this all the time. She calls Christy beef-brained. Ooh. Mr. Berkway keeps reading from the same journal. It is clear Mary Lou wrote those entries, and everyone is so mad about Mary Lou and what she put. Phoebe and Sal head to the police department again after class. When Sergeant Bickle is hesitant to help them, Phoebe says, "You idiot!" Okay, that's really not helpful, Phoebe. That's not how you get people to do what you want. Since Phoebe was really unhelpful and angry, they have to leave the police department. However, Sal notices something weird. It's a picture of Sergeant Bickle, his wife, and the lunatic. Dun, dun, dun. Chapter 32, Chicken and Blackberry Kisses. All right, so back to that story of Sal, Graham, and Gramps' car ride to Lewiston. Sal hears the trees saying, hurry, hurry, and rush, rush again. But they're going to stop to see Old Faithful. Remember that hurry, hurry, rush, rush from the trees is really Sal's anxiety about getting to her mom and seeing what has happened. So here's pictures of Old Faithful. It is a geyser that goes off about every 90 minutes. And it is in Wyoming. And it goes off about every 90 minutes or so. They call it Old Faithful because it's very, very predictable. So it's interesting to know that Graham and Gramps want to go see something called Old Faithful. It's very fitting because they're very faithful to each other. Sal says she has been praying to get to Lewiston without getting into a car accident and that they would get to her mother before her birthday and they would bring her home. This is very important. Sal thinks to herself, later I would realize that I had prayed for the wrong things. So potentially, Sal knows what's going on with her mom, and she is praying the wrong thing to get to her mother. She's praying the wrong thing about bringing her home. We're not sure yet. All right. The Eggman. Graham says she put a love letter from the Eggman under her mattress. Okay, so the Eggman is somebody she knew in the past, and he's basically a farmer. It's just a funny name to give him. Gramps says he knew that Graham put that love letter there under the mattress the whole time, but wants to know why she actually kept it if she doesn't love this man. Graham says she kept it because no one, including Gramps, has ever written her a love letter before. Gramps says he never knew she wanted him to write love letters. All right, back into the story with Phoebe. Sal sees Mrs. Partridge getting into a car with someone she calls Jimmy. It turns out it's Mr. Berkway. Mr. Berkway calls Miss Partridge Mom, which is really surprising to Sal. Sal was hoping Mr. Berkway and Miss Margaret Cadaver were in a relationship, because if that were true, Sal's dad would have to stop flirting with Miss Margaret Cadaver. But instead, we find out that Margaret and Mr. Berkway are twins. So here's their family tree. Miss Partridge, who used to be Miss Berkway, but then got remarried. When she was Miss Berkway, she had twins, Miss Margaret Cadaver, who used to be Margaret Berkway, until she got married and changed her name to Cadaver. So Miss Margaret is twins with Mr. Berkway. Dudes don't usually change their name when they get married, so he's been Mr. Berkway the whole time. Mr. Berkway continues to read the journals in class later on the next day. One of them says, "This is what I like about Jane." Remember, they're changing the names. "She is smart, but she doesn't act like she knows everything. She is cute, she is cute, she is cute." He keeps going on about how cute she is. Aw, how cute. It's obvious Ben wrote this entry. Sal sees him get really embarrassed and kind of put his face down, and he's red in the face. So we know it's Ben. But we also know if it's Ben, this thing about this girl being cute, it can't be about Sal because they were written before she went to school there. The next journal was about how Beth Ann convinced Mary Lou that kisses taste like chicken. Mary Lou calls her beef brain and is really upset. The next journal entry is about how they hated English, they hate poetry, hate to write, hate everything. Mr. Berkway says he loves their honesty. Mr. Berkway shows the kids this picture right here. Some kids see a vase. That's the black part in the middle. Some kids see two faces. That's the white part off to the sides. He tries to explain that even though some of the kids feel really embarrassed, when he reads the journals, he feels their honesty. So you can have one thing conveying two emotions. So those journals feel embarrassing for the kids, but they feel honest for him. Those are two things represented by one object. Then he reads Sal's journal. She wrote about her mom kissing those trees and eating the blackberries. Then talks about how Sal kisses trees all the time too. Everyone is kind of uncomfortable, but Sal feels like they're going to make fun of her. Mr. Berkway reads Sal's entry about Miss Cadaver and how she probably buried her husband in the backyard. The class goes crazy. But we as readers know now that Mr. Berkway's twin sister is Miss Margaret Cadaver. So I wonder how he feels about all that. It's also pretty apparent that Mr. Berkway did not read those journal entries before he started reading them out loud to the class. So this entry right here that Sal talked about, Miss Cadaver burying her husband in the backyard, kind of caught Mr. Berkway off guard a little bit. All right, guys, so that is your review for the day. Meet us back in class, and we'll discuss a little bit further some of the implications that these chapters have on Sal as a character.